Greetings, loyal subjects of the Imperium of Man. I am Librarian Elias of the Adeptus Astartes. I am creating a series of recordings with the intent of educating the general populace of the dangers of the galaxy. All of this information comes from the Lexicanum, provided to me by the Adeptus Mechanicus. I will be reading verbatim from their archives. This recording will cover one of the many foes the Imperium faces, the Primarch of the 20th Legion, Alpharius Omegon. Alpharius Omegon, also known as the last Primarch, or the Lord of Serpents, was one of the 20 Primarchs created by the Emperor in the earliest days of the Imperium, just after the Age of Strife. Like the other Primarchs, he was supposedly scattered from Terra by the gods of chaos and placed on a faraway world in an attempt to prevent the coming of the Age of the Imperium. In truth, Alpharius Omegon are twins, known as Alpharius and Omegon respectively, though they describe themselves as one soul in two bodies. While often considered the last Primarch to be discovered, they may have been the first. However, according to Alpharius himself, this account is a lie. Alpharius Omegon is an enigmatic figure within the history of the Legiones Astartes. No definitive record of their appearances and activities exist. There are claims that the Alpha Legion Marines assumed the name and identity during wars and even council meetings with other legions and Imperial officers, that Alpharius was somehow able to duplicate himself, and that he had a twin. Reports of his physical appearance seem to widely differ. Alpharius and Omegon seem to at least initially share a similar personality, one based around putting aside all morals, sentimentality, and loyalties in pursuit of the greater need for the Imperium. According to Alpharius himself, his purpose by the Emperor was to keep secrets and take the long view. Alpharius Omegon was supremely rational and pragmatic, lacking serious desire for honor or glory, while seemingly sympathetic to common Imperial citizens and showing disdain for those who recklessly expend their lives of the loyal. Alpharius was willing to kill innocents who threatened to expose his secrets. He saw such acts as necessary to preserve the Imperium, and considered such victims as fulfilling their duty to the Emperor by dying to ensure its continued safety. However, in a dubious account, allegedly penned by his own hand, the Primarch admitted that he hated to waste lives and preferred to spare and recruit those who learned too much about the Alpha Legion, such as Annie, Nezra, and her family. Despite the often grim nature of his missions and the dislike for other Primarchs, such as Gilliman and Rogodorn displayed for him, Alpharius, at least upon revealing himself, was not a particularly cold figure and was capable of humor and joy. He had a great deal of respect for several Primarchs, such as Lionel Johnson. It should be noted that the Alpha Legion's trademark secrecy extends to the records of their Primarch. Little recorded information on his background exists, and almost all of which is currently known by the Imperium comes from the information provided by Inquisitor Craven of the Ordo Malleus. Inquisitor Craven was subsequently believed to have been tainted by the Alpha Legion, and his current whereabouts are unknown. Hence, much of the Imperial data concerning the Primarch should be considered suspect, and indeed, there are some who believe that the whole Craven affair was an Alpha Legion plot to plant misinformation in the Imperial records. Greatest secret about the Alpha Legion's Primarch is apparently told to none outside the Legion, as unlike any of the other Primarchs, Alpharius has an identical twin, Omegon. It is unknown if the Emperor designed this, or was even aware of it. Upon their supposed reunion on Bar Savor, the twins speculated that the Emperor may have kept their existences hidden from one another, while it was equally possible they were split into two beings or scattered into the warp. Alpharius and Omegon are both the Primarch of the Legion, although Alpharius is the public face and appears as the more senior of the two. Though as both are identical, it is possible for them to switch roles and have Omegon play the public role. Supposedly, from their first meeting, and at least several times after, Omegon appeared before the small core of Horus instead of Alpharius. They have been described as one soul in two bodies, and collectively have been referred to as simply Alpharius Omegon, despite their close bond in describing themselves as two halves of the same soul. Omegon's loyalties may not lie with his brothers, or vice versa. During the Horus Heresy, Omegon, or perhaps really Alpharius, took suspicious steps against his brother. This included sending troops on a suicide mission to destroy a pylon array, preventing the White Scars about learning of Horus's betrayal without his brother's apparent knowledge. Afterwards, an Alpha Legion fleet that may have been under Omegon's command did not follow Horus's orders to join with the White Scars, but instead seemingly provoked them into hostilities after blockading them long enough for Jagatai Khan to receive a message from Rogal Dawn, warning of Horus's treachery. As the Alpha Legion are known for their schemes within schemes, the true nature of these acts may never be known. However, Alpharius and Omegon may not see completely eye to eye, as the former is more accepting of civilian deaths than the latter. By the time of the Siege of Terra, Omegon, posing as Alpharius, openly removed the Alpha Legion from the traitor war effort to take the throne world, though he offered a map of the Sol System's defenses as a parting gift. Much of Alpharius' history has been expanded upon in a tale given by the Primarch himself, which states that instead of being the last discovered, he was instead the first, and was raised upon Terra in secret. The tale is recounted in multiple places below, but despite being from Alpharius himself, the Primarch states it is a lie. The Ghost Legion, typical of the Alpha Legion's own nature, conflicting tales of how Alpharius was rediscovered by the Imperium exist. Many of the tales have been proven lies, while many more still remain unproven or unknown. A dubious account by Alpharius himself, which he states is a lie, states that he was actually the first Primarch to be found by the Emperor. According to this tale, after his scattering, Alpharius re-emerged on Terra's Zania Plateau, outside of the Proto-Imperial Palace. The young Primarch was found by the Emperor himself, who had to kill a group of scavengers present to keep the secret safe. Thereafter, the Emperor, alongside Malkador the Sigillite, raised and mentored Alpharius, turning him into a being who would know the importance of the whole before the individual, secrecy, and necessity. During this time, Alpharius was kept a total secret from the rest of the Imperium, even as new Primarchs were rediscovered. One of his first major actions was disguising himself as a First Legion Space Marine during the Palace coup at the end of the Unification Wars, after testing the security of the Custodes by attempting to assassinate the Emperor in a quasi-blood game. Alpharius became known to Constantine Valdor. Meanwhile, Omegon emerged far from Terra on an empty, nameless world. Living alone on the empty planet, Omegon was nonetheless able to come to understand that he was a manufactured being. On the abandoned world, the young Omegon discovered the Xenos weapon that would become known as the Pale Spear. When a group of human pirates arrived on his planet, Omegon was able to steal their ship and escape. He began a long journey towards Imperial health systems, hearing tales of the Emperor, Primarchs, and Space Marines. The dubious account by Alpharius goes on to state that as the Great Crusade continued, Alpharius secretly accompanied the Emperor in the rediscovery of several Primarchs. Alpharius was present as a disguised Space Marine when the Emperor came before Lionel Johnson and Lorgar. In between these endeavors, he continued to lead the 20th Legion, the Ghost Legion, in covert operations across the galaxy. During this time, he gathered around him a group of loyal captains, which included Armillus Dynat, Akil Gakul, Eitan, Igno Peck, Matthias Herzog, Kel Salonius, Sheed Ranko, and Octillion Score. Continuing to keep both his and his legion's existence hidden, Alpharius presented himself before Lionel Johnson to offer aid during the Rangdan genocides and perhaps cultivate him for War Master over Horus. Alpharius saw the Lion as a Primarch most like him, though he continued his deceptions before the Lord of the First. During the Xenocides, Alpharius identified himself by name, but denied being a Primarch. During the Ragdan Xenocides, Alpharius finally received the information he had long been waiting for, eventually coming to the world of Bar Savor after battling through Slouth, a Xenos race that was vaguely humanoid in shape, but covered in hundreds of half-melted, maggot-like worms. Alpharius and his squad were finally able to meet Omegon, who had been battling the Xenos of the world on his own. The twins immediately recognized one another. With their split soul finally reunited, Alpharius and Omegon agreed the time was right to formally reveal themselves to the Imperium at large, while keeping the nature of their dual existence hidden from even the Emperor, though they were not sure if he truly was unaware of it. The twin Primarchs subsequently orchestrated their coming encounter with Horus, though it was Omegon who took on the title of Alpharius during the incident. During the encounter, Alpharius used a ragtag fleet of primitive 1- and 2-man fighters to cleverly put the advanced ship of the Lunar Wolves fleet in a precarious position, which necessitated the intervention of Horus himself. Boarding the vengeful spirit, Omegon made his way to the bridge, killing or maiming several Lunar Wolves marines before Horus intervened. Welcoming his long-lost brother, Horus declared the last Primarch found before asking for his name. Omegon replied, "I am Alpharius." It is said that instead of immediately sending him to Terra to meet the Emperor, Horus kept Alpharius with him for some months. The two formed a strong bond, with Alpharius and his ragtag alliance quickly embracing the Imperium. Both brothers were greatly impressed with each other, though Alpharius refused to reveal his homeworld, denying that each world in the system that his brothers brought into compliance was his point of origin. Eventually, Alpharius had to journey to meet his father, the Emperor. Their meeting was, as were all times when the Emperor found one of his lost son, surrounded with much celebration. However, since the Great Crusade was in full swing, little time was spent in idle rejoicing, and Alpharius was quickly given the command of the 20th Legion. Created just a few decades before, renamed the Alpha Legion, they followed their Primarch on crusades. Alpharius quickly developed a unique approach to Astartes operations, focusing on the philosophies of initiative and flexibility, as well as extensive use of subterfuge and non-Astartes specialist operatives. This multitudinous, almost unstructured approach rankled Rabute Gilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, leading him to question Alpharius' approach to fighting. A violent discussion erupted between the two, which was closed when Gilliman pointed out his own legion's record, something that Alpharius could never hope to achieve, since his Alpha Legion was almost 200 years younger than the Ultramarines. They parted company acrimoniously, Alpharius believing Gilliman hated him. He resolved to ignore the Ultramarine Primarch from then on. Alpharius' methods were further critiqued by Rogel Dorn during the World Prince campaign. However, the criticisms stuck. Alpharius began to push his legion even further. More and more were the situations where he would take the more difficult course of action to force his Space Marines to grow. Plans were more complex, more subtle, while at the same time relying on more and more factors to achieve victory. Training was more intense, and the new strategies and approaches were constantly developed, as Alpharius sought to prove the worth of both his legion and martial philosophy. It has long been supposed that since Alpharius was only familiar with one Primarch, Horus, it was self-explanatory why he chose the side he did at the outset of the Heresy. Indeed, the very planet Isfont 5, where Horus struck his first blow against his fellow legions by destroying most of the Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamander's legions in a massive ambush, was very reminiscent of plans that Alpharius had created in the past. However, it is possible that there is another reason for Alpharius leading his legion to the side of the traitors, a secret known only inside the legion. Around 2 years before the beginning of the Heresy, Alpharius Omegon was apparently contacted by a member of a Xenos organization called the Cabal, who brought him visions of the impending civil war within the Imperium and expanded knowledge of the nature and designs of chaos. It is believed that the Cabal convinced Alpharius that the only way to permanently defeat chaos was to ensure that Horus was victorious. It is perhaps for this reason that Alpharius Omegon, secretly true to the Imperium and loyal to the Emperor, may have chosen to join the heretics. Further, during the Heresy, the Cabal sought to lead Alpharius in Omegon's actions in order to make Horus's victory easier. One such action was the ordeal against the Raven God, with the intent of preventing Corax from rebuilding his legion. After the blows struck on Isfan 5, some Alpha Legion Marines were infiltrated under the direction of Omegon in the Raven God, thanks to Alpha Legion apothecaries crafting the facial traits of some dead Raven Gods over the face of their own legionaries. Once known through their infiltrators that the original genome of the Primarch was in the hands of Corax, Omegon acted in order to recover the secret knowledge so the Alpha Legion could be expanded in future times. With the help of renegade Mechanicum Magos Unithrax, the Alpha Legion tainted the original genome recovered from the laboratories of the Emperor on Terra. This was accomplished by introducing a virus-vectored mutagen based on demonic blood, making the successive Raven God implantations result in operational but deeply mutated Astartes, exhibiting scales, horns, fangs, tails, overgrown muscles, and similar features. Meanwhile, Omegon, bound to his service, although not directly consistent of the fact, both a renegade Mechanicus faction and some representatives of the ancient and noble guilds of Kievar, the home planet of the Raven God. He pushed them in open rebellion against the Raven God, and in the chaos resulting from the battle, he personally recovered all data stored in Corax's laboratories, as well as the tainted original genome. In the aftermath, Alpharius was obliged to give the obtained data to Horus, who handed them to Fabius Bile for deeper research. What Bile did not know was that the data was practically useless, since it was incomplete at best. Of course, the Alpha Legion kept for itself the integral data, as well as the corrupted genome. The plan of Alpharius had always been to use the data to raise the Alpha Legion over all other legions, loyalists, and traitors. After this action, Omegon left the Cabal representative, a Theathetir, on board his ship into the void, stating that the Legion would fulfill its engagement on its own, without external interference or control. Later in the Heresy, Alpharius dispatched forces to attempt to block the White Scars from leaving the Contracts campaign and joining Loyalist forces. The White Scars were alerted to the Heresy after Omegon initiated a mission to destroy a jamming array. Despite a fierce battle with the White Scars, these ships may have not been armed, further compounding the true nature of Alpharius or Omegon. Alpharius went on to corner the Space Wars under Leman Russ himself, nearly destroying them and dueling Russ while disguised as one of his own Lernan bodyguards. Victory seemed certain for Alpharius until he was forced to withdraw after the Loyalists received Archangel's reinforcements. Alpharius, or at least an Alpha Legion member claiming to be him, again appeared among the force of Shattered Legion's resistance fighters, assuming the mantle of Iron Hand's leader, Shadrach Medusan, and garbing a unit of his own Marines in Iron Hand battle gear. Alpharius' disguise was completely undetectable by the members of the Iron Hand's Legion he met, traveling in a vessel that appeared to be the Iron Heart, Medusan's own flagship. Alpharius fell in with a separate unit of mixed Istvan survivor Marines under the command of Cadmus Tyro, an Iron Hand's captain, and convinced them, in his disguise as Medusan, to aid him in an action against the other members of the Alpha Legion. His deception was revealed toward the end of the affair, and the survivors of Tyro's force escaped with the knowledge that Alpharius had been impersonating Medusan. In preparation to infiltrate the Sol System in the Solar War, Alpharius used his librarians to seemingly switch bodies with his trusted Harrow Master, Calcelonius, to ensure secrecy. Alpharius also erased his own memories and took on Salonius's persona. As the real Salonius led a fleet of 200 Alpha Legion warships into the Sol system, Alpharius led a headhunter and human operative team in setting the stage for its arrival through acts of sabotage and preparation. During the final action, Alpharius's memories were restored by a psychic trigger. During the subsequent Battle of Pluto, Alpharius confronted Rogel Dawn in a chamber locked inside of the Hydra Fortress moon in Pluto's orbit. He killed Archimus's team, hunting him, but left Archimus mortally wounded and alive to watch as Dawn teleported into the chamber. Both of Dawn's Huskars and Alpharius's Lernians teleported in, but the Primarch slaughtered the other's warriors. The two battled, with Alpharius dealing Dawn many wounds, using his speed to stay out of reach. Throughout the fight, he tried to convince Dawn that he was there to teach him how to win, to expose his weaknesses, that he could not win the current war, and how there needed to be a new type of war. He also claimed that Dawn didn't understand what he was fighting for, and they both cared about the future. He only knew the truth regarding the conflict, and did not fight for Horus, but for Dawn. Eventually, he tried to kill Dawn with a blow from his pale spear, but Archimus saw the strike and tried to intervene. However, Archimus reeled harmlessly off of the spear's haft. Archimus was unaware that Dawn had seen the strike, the Imperial Fist Primarch outplaying Alpharius by using a move he'd seen against a giant orc decades earlier. Dawn stepping into the shot and taking it in his shoulder to pin Alpharius in place. He then grabbed the spear and sliced Alpharius' hands from the wrist, before he slashed Alpharius across the chest and stabbed Alpharius with his own spear. Dawn finished by cutting through Alpharius' skull with his mighty chainsword, Storm's Teeth. Archimus soon passed away, but a team under his second Kestros found the Primarch and the now deceased Archimus. Dawn then hid from the loyalist Alpharius' appearance within the Sol system and his death, promoting Kestros and the others with direct knowledge of the events to Huskar. To replace those who died, Dawn sought to deny Alpharius any acknowledgement or honor. Far away, Omegon sensed the death of his twin, and he grew distant upon being notified that Horus demanded to speak with Alpharius. Omegon took up the name and became his twin brother. Alpharius then reappeared alone on Ulanor during a muster of traitor forces there in preparation for the Siege of Terra. No other Alpha Legion forces were present in the system, causing the other traitors to wonder how Alpharius could even be there at all. Before Horus's dark triumph on Ulanor, Alpharius appeared in the War Master's command tent and gave him a cylinder which contained a detailed layout of all the Sol System's defenses and infrastructure. Alpharius then took out a dagger and shattered it on his hand, throwing the pieces at Horus's feet. Before leaving, Abaddon demanded that Horus kill him for such insolence, but the War Master instead let Alpharius go. During the end of the Heresy, Alpharius, or after his apparent death on Pluto, Omegon appeared more interested in proving his own legion's worth by fighting, at every chance he got, the best of the loyalist legions. Thus, even after Horus was cast down and the Heresy over, the Alpha Legion kept on fighting, moving more and more towards the Galactic East, towards the Ultramarines. It was on the world known as Escrador that Alpharius Omegon and Rabute Guilliman would meet for the last time. Believing that Guilliman would adopt his standard Codex deployment procedures, Alpharius was surprised by the Ultramarines, as a splinter force, including their Primarch, made a quick strike at the Alpha Legion's headquarters. Both Primarchs met in combat, and Alpharius Omegon was killed. Believing the combat over, for who could ever survive the loss of their Primarch in battle, the Ultramarines were taken by surprise by the remaining elements of the Alpha Legion when they struck back a day after. After a week of constant fighting and heavy losses, the Ultramarine Strike Force managed to reunite with their main elements and quickly evacuated the planet. Even though they had lost their Primarch, the Alpha Legion had soundly beaten the Ultramarines, who proceeded to bombard their foe's position from outer space. It should be noted, however, that Alpharius' death is still considered to be suspect, even by the Ultramarines, and he may still be at large. Alpharius' apparent earlier death during the Battle of Pluto during the Heresy complicates the mystery even further, as it may have been Omegon who really died on Escrador, if at all. Many within the Alpha Legion, such as Quetzal Karthak, seem to believe it was Omegon who was slain on Escrador, though others, like Occam, believe him to still be alive. Whatever the truth, the Primarch of the Alpha Legion has not been seen since. At some point after the Heresy, word reaches the High Lords of a Chaos Lord claiming to be Alpharius, ravaging the moons of the Denerva subsector. Debate rages about whether this could potentially be the case, for the Primarch's death has been recorded more than once across the span of Imperial history. Nonetheless, the Grandmaster of Assassins dispatches a force of 6 Vindicare assassins. Over a number of years, they identify and slay a dozen Alpha Legion champions, bearing the name of Alpharius. But the reports of raids upon the subsector's mining operations only intensify. 5 years later, the heads of all 6 Vindicare assassins are found frozen in the food storage halls of the High Lords. A partially redacted quote credited to Alpharius Omegon also exists, dated to around the year 123. Though the Millennium is redacted, it likens the chapter to an unpredictable serpent and says that they have retained their identity and purpose, while other Space Marines have fallen to stagnation and damnation. It goes on to say that they are uncertain allies to the Chaos Gods, are unaffected by the lies of the Xenos, and are a necessary evil to the Imperium, acting as both its poison and antidote in an unavoidable destiny that they have created for themselves and others. While the Astartes of the Alpha Legion, once at least, made an attempt to all look alike, both Alpharius and Omegon were still somewhat distinctive. Taller than the rest of the Legion, slightly copper-skinned, bald, and possessed a heavy brow, they somewhat resembled their brother, Horus. Unlike him, Alpharius and Omegon had piercing eyes that seemed to glitter, appearing to shift color from a cold Arctic blue to a shimmering green. The overall impression was one of nobility and intelligence. One way to tell the two apart was when Omegon was performing as commander of Efred's stealth squad. Large portions of his power armor and gear were painted black and otherwise darkened. The armor worn by Alpharius was not particularly different from that of an ordinary Alpha Legionnaire. Alpharius wore at least 4 sets of armor before the Heresy, which he discarded when they showed signs to identify himself. Alpharius himself was the smallest of the Primarchs, but his lieutenants were larger than normal Space Marines. This allowed them to often switch places and assume each other's identities. To disguise Alpharius Omegon further, members of the Alpha Legion would drink a substance mixed with the Primarch's blood that seems to temporarily turn them into him. The disguise is so convincing that even the Legion's own apothecaries are fooled by it, and those who undertake the process are given some of that Primarch's memories. Another more bizarre method of disguising himself further saw Alpharius use his librarians to apparently switch bodies with members of his Legion, as was the case with Celsalonius. Alpharius' most potent method of disguise is one he apparently was born with, comparing it to the innate powers of the Primarchs, such as Conrad Kurz's visions, or Corax's ability to hide amongst the shadows. Alpharius states he has the psychic power that enables him to hide or otherwise minimalize his presence to others, while not truly cloaking himself. Alpharius is able to render himself a diminished and inconsequential figure to those he uses his power upon, essentially allowing him to hide amongst others. This ability extends from standard humans to even Primarchs who confused Alpharius for a standard Space Marine. Like his brothers, Alpharius Omegon wielded a set of wargear unique to themselves, typical of the Alpha Legion's nature. Alpharius and Omegon utilized completely non-standard and inconsistent wargear, and the Primarch himself did not typically engage in open combat. He often preferred using chameleon-lined cloaks and armor that partially cloaked the wearer. However, Alpharius and Omegon were observed utilizing reptilian-style power armor known as the Pythian Scales. One of his stranger reported weapons was the Xenos artifact known as the Pale Spear, and a plasma weapon known as the Hydra's Spite. Alpharius Omegon was also seen with power swords, power spears, and plasma guns in combat situations. Omegon possesses a suit of grey power armor that he kept hidden from even his brother Alpharius, though if one takes into consideration Alpharius' dubious tale of being the first rediscovered Primarch, the suit belonged to him, as opposed to the later discovered Omegon. This concludes the information regarding Alpharius. More in-depth information regarding him will be recorded at a later date. This is Librarian Elias, signing off.